In this tutorial, we're going to look at Blender's grease pencil. If you're using a pad, you need to make sure that the pen works with Blender. So go to Edit, Preferences, and then on the Input tab, make sure that you've selected Emulate 3-button mouse. And that means that you can use Alt to rotate or Shift Alt to pan. In my scene, I have a camera, and we'll be using that a lot in this tutorial, so you need to make sure that you have a camera in your scene. If you use 0, you can see through the camera. You can go to View in Object Mode, select Lock Camera to View, and then just use your mouse to find a position that you like. When that's done, just deselect Lock Camera to View. At the top here, there are a number of tabs. For this tutorial, we'll be using the 2D Animation tab. If you can't see it, you can find it under this plus icon here. So now we want to start drawing. The first thing that you need to do is, at the moment, if you go to Object Mode, you'll see there isn't a Draw option, and that's because you first of all need to add a grease pencil and a blank. So add grease pencil blank, and now in the drop down you'll see Draw. And immediately you can start to draw in your scene. But what we want to do is create a layer so that we have different layers with fill or line work. So to do that, you go to the green squiggly icon here and then select New Layer, and I'm going to rename this to Line Art. Now for each layer, or for each line or fill, we need to add a material. So this material icon here will allow you to create a new material. I'm going to call this again Line Art. And you can see that automatically it's on stroke, and at the moment it's on black. But let's just say I want to have a blue pen. You'll notice that up here there are some options for your pen style. So on this option here, you can see there are lots of different styles that you can experiment with, but for now we'll use Draw Pen. You can change the thickness of the pen here and the strength as well. And now when you draw in your scene, you'll see you've got blue. But if you change that colour afterwards, you can change it as you go along. Now, when you pan, the line is on a plane in 3D space. And what we want to do now is look a little bit more at how that works. So, first of all, if you go to Overlays, at the bottom here you'll see there's an option Canvas. And when you select that, you can see this invisible canvas, this magic canvas appear. And when you draw, what happens is the pen paints onto that canvas surface. So if I Control Z, what you'll see is as I rotate at the moment, that canvas is following me. And that's because at the top here it's in view mode. If you set it to front, it stays fixed, looking at the front, side. You've also got the top option. But what we want to do now is use the front option. So now let's draw. And you can see that it's on that plane, and it's also drawing beneath the plane, beneath the surface that we have here as well. So what we really want to do is actually lift the canvas up a bit. Now the easiest way to move this in a scene is to go to 3D cursor here, and that means that when you use this option, use this cursor, anywhere that you tap on in the scene, the canvas will go to it. And that's quite hard in perspective mode to see where that actually is. So the best way to do this is to go into orthographic mode. So if you use 3 on your keypad, you can go to the side. So that's an easy way to see from the side. And then 1 is from the front. You can just keep playing this until you get it in the right place. So I'm quite happy with that. And now if I go back into looking through my camera using 0, you'll see that when I select my pen tool and I draw, I'm drawing on that plane, which is exactly what I want. So now let's start drawing. Oh, and actually another thing to note is you don't have to draw on this directly on this canvas. You can draw above and below, out to the sides, and it will still stay on that plane. So don't Ctrl Z. Now let's just say I want to use this shape to trace a circle. So what I can do, just zoom in a bit, just use my pen tool to draw around the edge, and I'm going to do a particularly bad job at tracing here. So that's really not accurate at all. But luckily for us, Blender has some very good tools for sorting this out. So the first thing that we can look at is actually what is this line. Now if you go to Object Mode and select the line work, and then tab into Edit Mode, if you use A to select all, when you zoom in, you'll see that this is a mesh made of lots of vertices, and that means that we can use lots of different tools to help us sort out our lines. So the first thing that I can show you is if we go to Sculpt mode here, there are loads of tools and things to try out, but for now we could just use the grab option, and you'll see that it allows you to manipulate that line. And actually I'm finding this brush a bit small, so again you can go up to the top here, radius, just pull the line until you get it as you want it. But it's a little bit bumpy still, so there's another tool, which is the smooth tool at the top here, and that will help you smooth out even further. So that's looking a lot better. Now again, because it's a mesh, if we go to Edit Mode, there's an option up here, Stroke, and you can subdivide to add more vertices, or in our case you might want to use Simplify Fixed, and that just reduces the number of vertices, so that can also be quite handy. If you go back to grab, just sometimes makes it a little bit easier. Anyway, so you can keep playing with this. Another thing that you might have noticed is that here there's a bit of an overlap, and if you find that you get that issue, you can use, in draw mode, you can use the cut tool here just to tidy up. So it's not exactly perfect, but yeah, so it shows you what's possible. So now that we have the line art, and again you can see how this is all being drawn on the same plane, what we want to do now is add a fill colour. So first thing we'll do is we'll create a new layer, because we want the fill to be on a layer behind the line work, line art. So you go to Layers, Add Layer, and I'm going to call this Circle Fill, but of course you might have different naming conventions. You might call it lighter or darker, whatever makes sense for your project. And I'm going to put it behind the line art. And now I've got a layer, I need to create a material. So again, new material, and I think I might call this mid-tone. You could call it the colour that you're going to fill, but the issue with that is that if you then decide to change the colour, it can get a bit confusing. So yeah, there are lots of different ways to name, and you'll see that on default it's selected, or by default it's selected stroke. Because this is a fill, we want to deselect that and select fill, and you'll see here again, as with the stroke, you can change colour. So we can make this sort of yellowy colour. And now with that in place, we can go to the fill tool, and if you just select, it will fill like so. Another thing that's quite handy to know is that if you hold Control with the fill tool, you can use it almost like a paintbrush, and that can be useful if you have a gap in your line. What can happen when you fill is that it can bleed out and fill everything. So this is a good approach to take if you find that you have gaps in your line work. But for now, we'll just fill. And again, if we pan in the scene, we've got line work and a fill colour. So one thing we can look at now is how do you actually get this out of Blender? How do you render this? So if you go to the top render image, you can see that you'll get 2D image out, and you can then go to image save and save on your machine. If, for example, you don't want the 3D objects behind, or you just want the line work, the grease pencil, what you need to do is go to the drop down here and select the camera option, and Blender will only render out the objects or the things in the scene that have the camera on. So find your grease pencil, leave that one on, and just turn off everything else. And I'm going to leave the lights on as well. Okay, so let's see. If you go to render image, so it's just the line work. Another thing that's good to know is you might want to change your background colour, so you don't necessarily want that dark grey, and you can do that by going to the world tab here, and then the colour for the background is set here. So if you wanted to make it, say you want to make it pink, render image, and you've got a background colour as well. And one last thing to show you is that at the moment we've got a 1920 by 1080 image, but you can change that by going to the output properties here, and you can change your settings. So if, for example, you wanted to export for a social platform, you could change it into a square, and if you want to increase the quality, you can multiply this, double it, for example, and that will give you a higher resolution image. And that's our tutorial.